Medic with beat-up combat boots, really. A young officer sneered as he saw Lena Carter wiping blood off a stretcher wearing a blood-stained t-shirt and dust-worn combat pants. Another soldier mocked, "She looks like she got exiled from logistics. Probably can't even tell an artery from a vein." When she handed over the medicine, the patient turned away. "Get me a real doctor." Lena didn't reply. She simply tightened her grip on the backpack strap. No one noticed the patch beneath her medkit had faded, but the Black Falcon and number string still remained Echo 5. The forward operating base was a gritty outpost carved into a rocky Middle Eastern valley, where the air carried dust diesel and the faint tang of gunpowder. Lena Carter moved through the med tent, her long black hair tied loosely, her pale skin faintly reddened by the desert sun. Her t-shirt was crusted with blood, her combat pants faded to a dull gray, and her boots were so worn the soles flapped slightly with each step. She sorted morphine vials, cleaned surgical tools, and stacked bandages with a rhythm that looked effortless, like she could do it in her sleep. The tent was a chaotic sprawl of cots, crates, and the sharp sting of antiseptic, with soldiers shuffling in and out, some groaning, some cursing, some staring blankly at the canvas ceiling. Lena worked without a word, her face calm, almost too calm, but the whispers followed her. "Who's this girl?" A private muttered his arm in a sling. "Some volunteer who got lost." To them, she was nobody, just the girl who scrubbed blood. Lieutenant Brandt, the officer who'd sneered, leaned against a crate, his scraped hand wrapped in gauze Lena had applied. He was young, maybe 25, with a uniform so crisp it looked untouched by the desert. "Nurse and janitor, huh?" he said, loud enough for the tent to hear. "Do you even know the difference between an artery and a vein?" His buddy Corporal Reese, a stocky guy with a buzz cut and a smirk, laughed hard. "Look at that outfit, probably exiled from supply logistics." Lena handed Brandt his pain meds, her eyes meeting his for a split second. No anger, just a steady gaze that made him shift uncomfortably, his smirk faltering. She turned back to her work, wiping a tray with a rag, her boots scuffing softly on the dirt floor. The other soldiers watched, some smirking, some ignoring her, but none saw her fingers linger on her backpack strap, where that faded Echo 5 patch hid in plain sight. One morning, a medic named Jenkins, with a loud voice and a habit of talking over everyone, tossed a clipboard onto Lena's station. "You missed a form bandage, girl?" he said, his tone dripping with fake pity. He was older, about 30, with a paunch and a swagger that screamed insecurity. The other medic snickered, glancing at Lena's scuffed boots as she picked up the clipboard. She flipped through it, her hands steady, and slid it back to him without a word. Jenkins leaned closer, his breath sour. "What, you don't talk? Too busy playing nurse?" Lena's eyes flicked up, calm but piercing. "Check the bottom page," she said, her voice low. Jenkins froze, then looked. His own signature was missing, not hers. The tent went quiet, the other medics pretending not to notice. As Jenkins stormed out, did his face red. Lena went back to sorting syringes, her movements unchanged, but the air felt heavier, like everyone was waiting for something to snap. Early one evening, a group of off-duty soldiers lounged near the mess hall, their laughter carrying across the dusty compound. One of them, a wiry specialist named Gorman, spotted Lena carrying a crate of medical supplies and nudged his friend. "Check out the charity case," he said, his voice loud enough to turn heads. "Bet she's here to pad her resume for some fancy hospital back home." His buddies chuckled, their eyes raking over her stained t-shirt and worn boots. Lena kept walking her stride, even, but she paused by a water barrel, setting the crate down with a deliberate thud. "You volunteering to carry this, Gorman?" She asked, her tone flat, but sharp enough to cut through the laughter. Gorman's grin faltered and he shrugged, trying to play it off, but the others went quiet, their eyes darting between them. Lena hoisted the crate again and moved on, leaving Gorman to mutter under his breath, his bravado deflated. Lena wasn't just some random volunteer, though. Nobody knew it. She'd been born into a family so powerful, their name could shift entire industries. Their mansion was all marble floors and silent halls, where discipline was law, stand tall, speak softly, never flaunt. Lena had walked away from that life, trading silk dresses for combat boots, choosing dust over diamonds. Here she was, invisible, or worse, a target. A private named Kessler, with a chipped tooth and a bad attitude, tossed a soiled bandage at her feet one afternoon, grinning like he'd won something. "Clean that up, bandage girl. That's your job, right?" Lena knelt, picked it up and dropped it into a biohazard bin, her movements slow, deliberate. Her jaw tightened for a moment, and her fingers brushed that faded Echo 5 patch, unnoticed by everyone else. She stood, her eyes flicking to Kessler, who looked away, his grin fading under her steady gaze. The base had a pecking order, and Lena was at the bottom. Her beauty was quiet, unpolished, the kind you'd miss if you were looking for flash. She didn't wear makeup, didn't chatter or charm, didn't try to fit in. That made her an easy mark. One evening, a sergeant named Hollis leaned over the counter where Lena was sorting syringes. He was broad-shouldered with a fake smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You ever think about dressing like you belong here?" he said, his voice sharp with condescension. "You look like you wandered in from a refugee camp." Soldiers nearby chuckled, eyeing her scuffed boots. Lena didn't look up. She slid a tray into a sterilizer, her hands steady. "You got something to say, Hollis?" she asked, her voice low, almost soft. The question cut through the air, and Hollis hesitated, his smile fading. He muttered something and walked away. The tent stayed quiet, the tension thick. The next afternoon, a supply truck rolled in, and a group of soldiers gathered to unload crates under the scorching sun. Lena was there hauling medical supplies to the tent, her arms straining under a box of saline bags. A corporal named Vega, all bravado and slicked back hair, spotted her and laughed loudly. "What's this, the delivery girl now?" he called, his voice carrying across the yard. "Stick to mopping blood, sweetheart, you're slowing us down." The other soldiers snickered, tossing crates to each other while stealing glances at her. Lena set the box down, her movements slow, and turned to face Vega. "You want it faster? Carry it yourself," she said, her voice even, but sharp enough to make him pause. She picked up another crate, her boots kicking up dust, and walked away as Vega's laugh died in his throat, his buddies nudging him to let it go. "Hey, if this story's hitting you, take a second, grab your phone, hit that like button, drop a comment below about what got you, and subscribe to the channel. It means a lot to keep sharing these stories, and I'd love to know you're out there feeling this with me. All right, let's keep going." The base was buzzing with rumors of an ambush, the air thick with unease. The red echo alert blared through the speakers, a harsh wail that sent soldiers scrambling for rifles and vests. The med tent cleared out fast, non-combatants ordered to evacuate behind a ridge. Lieutenant Carver, a wiry man with a sharp jaw and sharper temper, stormed in barking orders. "Non-combatants out," he shouted, pointing at Lena. "Med tent personnel evacuate behind the ridge." Lena stood reaching for her helmet, but Carver cut her off. "Who do you think you are? Stay inside and stitch up the dead." His voice was loud, meant to humiliate, and soldiers smirked as they rushed past, kicking up dust. Lena's hand froze on her helmet. She sat back down, her face blank, and started repacking her med kit with slow, careful movements. Just before the chaos hit, a young private, barely 19, hobbled into the tent, clutching a torn sleeve soaked with blood. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. The other medics were packing up, but he looked at Lena, desperate. "You gotta help me," he whispered, his voice trembling. Everyone else ignored him, focused on the evacuation orders. Lena knelt beside him, tearing open a gauze pack. "Hold still," she said, her voice soft but steady, like she was calming a scared kid. She cleaned the gash, stitched it with quick, precise movements, and taped it shut as the sirens wailed. The private stared at her, his breathing slowing. "You're not just a medic, are you?" he mumbled. Lena didn't answer. She handed him a water bottle and moved on, but his eyes followed her like he'd seen something nobody else had. During a tense moment in the lockdown, a radio operator named Ellison, with a smug grin and a habit of name-dropping his connections, sauntered into the med tent to grab a bandage for a minor cut. He spotted Lena reorganizing a shelf and snorted. "But you're still here playing doctor," he said, loud enough for the remaining medics to hear. "Shouldn't you be sweeping floors somewhere?" His laugh was sharp, and a few soldiers nearby joined in their eyes on Lena's worn boots. She didn't pause, just kept stacking gauze packs, her hands steady. Then she turned, holding a bandage out to him. "This what you need, Ellison?" she asked, her voice calm, but with an edge that made his grin falter. He snatched it and left, but not before knocking over a tray of tools, the clatter echoing as he hurried out. Lena knelt to pick them up, her face unreadable, but the medics nearby exchanged glances, sensing something unspoken. Then came the screams. A soldier stumbled in his leg, torn open shrapnel, embedded deep near the bone. Blood pooled on the floor, the air sour with panic. The medics froze, their hands shaking. "We need a surgeon." One yelled, but the nearest doctor was miles away. The soldier was thrashing his screams, guttural, his face pale as death. Lena stepped forward, her voice cutting through. "No anesthesia," she said, calm as stone. Nobody moved. She grabbed forceps, leaned over the wound, and went to work. 12 seconds, she pulled the shrapnel free. No blood spilled, and closed the wound with one adhesive strip. The soldiers' screams faded to gasps. The tent was silent, every eye on her. Carver in the corner looked like he'd been slapped, his mouth half open. She didn't acknowledge the stares. Lena wiped the forceps clean and went back to her station, her boots scuffing softly. The medics whispered, glancing at her. How'd she do that? One muttered, "No way, she's just a bandage girl." Brandt was there, his scraped hand forgotten. He opened his mouth, but Lena's eyes flicked to him and he stopped. It wasn't a glare, just a look steady and cold that said she saw through him. He left his boots loud on the dirt floor. Jenkins, the loudmouth medic, lingered nearby, watching her stack bandages. His usual smirk was gone, replaced by a frown like he was trying to figure her out. The tent felt different now. The air charged like everyone knew something had shifted, but couldn't name it. Later that day, a supply clerk named Morris, with a nasally voice and a habit of gossiping, shuffled into the tent with a stack of requisition forms. He dropped them on Lena's station, smirking. "You're still here, huh? Thought they'd ship you back to wherever they found you by now." He was short, with a cheap watch that looked out of place on his wrist, and he leaned in, expecting a reaction. Lena kept sorting vials, her hands steady, but she paused just long enough to make him notice. "Forms are for the quartermaster," she said, sliding the stack back to him. Morris blinked, caught off guard, and muttered, "Yeah, well, you'd know about grunt work." He grabbed the forms and left, but not before tripping over a crate, his paper scattering as the medic stifled laughs. Lena didn't look up, but her lips twitched just for a second. The alert kept blaring, the base locked down radios crackling with reports of movement in the hills. Lena stayed in the tent, her hands busy, but her backpack was never far. During a lull, she paused, her fingers brushing an old photo tucked into her medkit, a faded snapshot of her in tactical gear, standing with a unit all wearing black Falcon patches. She didn't linger on it, just tucked it away, but her fingers hesitated like the weight of that memory was heavier than the kit itself. A medic named Torres, a quiet woman with sharp eyes, saw the photo's edge and frowned, but didn't ask. Lena zipped the kit shut and kept working, her hands moving slower like she was carrying something nobody could see. The tent was quieter now, the usual chatter muted as if her presence was starting to unsettle people. As night fell, a group of soldiers huddled near the tent, passing a cigarette and trading stories. One, a lanky private named Farley, spotted Lena restocking a shelf and nudged his buddy. "Bet she's never even held a rifle," he said loud enough for her to hear. "Probably faints at the sight of a real fight." The others laughed, their voices carrying in the still air. Lena kept working her back to them, but her hands paused on a box of gauze. She turned slightly, just enough to catch Farley's eye, and said, "You dropped your lighter." She pointed to the ground where his cheap plastic lighter lay in the dirt. Farley's laugh died as he scrambled to pick it up, his face flushing under her steady gaze. The others went quiet, the cigarette forgotten, as Lena turned back to her work without another word. Just before the ambush, a maintenance tech named Ortiz, with a habit of showing off his technical jargon, was fixing a generator near the tent. He saw Lena checking her medkit and snorted. "What's the point of you even being here?" He called, his voice carrying over the hum of the machine. "You're just gonna get in the way when things go south." His coworkers chuckled, glancing at her faded pants. Lena didn't look up, just kept organizing her kit, but she slid a bandage roll across the table toward him. "For when you cut yourself again," she said, her tone flat but pointed. Ortiz froze, his hand instinctively touching a bandaged finger from a slip-up days earlier. His coworkers' laughter turned on him, and he busied himself with the generator, his face red, as Lena turned away, her movements calm but deliberate. When the ambush hit, it was chaos. Explosions roared, shaking the ground. Gunfire cracked, mortars screamed, and the base turned into a blur of shouting and smoke. Lena grabbed a silenced Glock from her pack and sprinted out of the tent. A soldier, his face streaked with dirt, saw her and yelled, "Where the hell did she get that?" Another, a private with a bloody forehead, barked, "Get back inside. We don't need some wannabe hero getting herself killed." Lena didn't stop. She moved like she knew exactly where she was going, her steps silent. Inside a bandage box, she'd flipped the lining earlier, revealing a black karambit knife and an encrypted radio. The screen blinked, Echo 5 stand by. She whispered, "The bait's been spotted. Stand ready." Her hood went up, her eyes cold as steel. She climbed onto a supply container's roof, her movements quick but controlled. Scanning the hills, she caught the glint of sniper scopes in the fading light. 4 shots, 4 kills, enemy snipers dropped in under 8 seconds. Below, Sergeant Dawkins peered through his scope, his jaw slack. "Who's leading that counter-snipe?" he muttered, his voice lost in the gunfire. Nobody answered. Soldiers stared, rifles half raised, as Lena slid down and vanished into the shadows. The young private she'd stitched up watched from a cot, whispering to a medic, "That's her. That's the one who fixed me." The medic shook his head like he didn't want to believe it. Back in the tent, Torres, the quiet medic, clutched a bandage roll, her eyes wide like she was piecing something together. The base was still under fire, but Lena's shots had bought time. Commander Torres, a grizzled man with a voice like gravel, radioed HQ. "We have a female sharpshooter stabilizing the area. Confirm identity." The response crackled, Echo 5. "That unit doesn't exist." Torres's face tightened. "She's saving our lives," he shouted. HQ's voice was cold. "No record of anyone named Lena Carter in our combat or medical database." Torres slammed the radio down, his eyes scanning the chaos. Near the comms tent, a soldier named Riley, a nervous type with twitchy hands, was clutching a crumpled paper with Echo 5 scrawled on it. He'd found it in a supply crate, and his hands shook as he stared at it, like he'd stumbled onto something he shouldn't have. During a lull in the fighting, Lena crouched behind a crate checking her radio. A faint beep came from her pack, and she pulled out a small tracker, its red light blinking steadily. She glanced at it, then at the hills, her lips tightening. She'd known the ambush was coming, had seen signs nobody else noticed. A scuff in the dirt, a glint too high in the rocks. A soldier nearby, his face smeared with soot, saw her and froze. "You're not supposed to be here," he said, his voice shaky. Lena didn't look at him. She pocketed the tracker and moved on her steps, silent. The soldier watched her go, his rifle forgotten his breath, catching as he realized she wasn't just running into the fight she was hunting. The fighting dragged into the night, the valley lit by flares and gunfire. A low hum cut through the noise, a UAV flying low over the base. It dropped a supply case, the thud echoing. Stamped on the side, Echo 5 code, Black Rain. Lena sprinted to it, donning infrared goggles. She opened the crate, a battlefield map, a SCAR L rifle, and a thermal mask. She slung the rifle over her shoulder, her movements fluid like she'd trained for this her whole life. A lanky kid named Peters watched his rifle forgotten in his hands. "That's not standard issue," he whispered to no one, his voice trembling. Nearby, a soldier dropped his canteen, the clatter loud in the sudden quiet as Lena's silhouette moved against the flare-lit sky. As the battle raged, a wounded soldier was dragged into the tent, his arm mangled from a grenade blast. The medics were overwhelmed, shouting for supplies. But Lena was already there, her hands moving with a surgeon's precision. She tied a tourniquet, cleaned the wound, and stabilized him in under a minute, her face calm despite the chaos. A medic named Hayes, who'd always ignored her, watched in stunned silence. "Where'd you learn that?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Lena didn't answer. She handed him a bandage roll and moved to the next cot. But Hayes kept staring like he had just realized she wasn't who he'd thought. Outside, the gunfire grew sporadic, Lena's earlier shots having thrown the enemy into disarray. In the early hours as the fighting slowed, a communications tech named Salazar, who prided himself on knowing everyone's business, was sorting cables near the command post. He saw Lena checking her gear and called out, "What's a janitor doing with a radio like that?" His voice was mocking, meant to draw laughs from the soldiers nearby. Lena didn't pause, just adjusted the radio's settings with a flick of her wrist. "You sure you plugged that cable in right, Salazar?" she said, her voice low but cutting. He glanced down, realizing he'd crossed 2 wires, and his face flushed as the soldier snickered at him instead. Lena moved on her steps, steady, leaving Salazar to fumble with his cables, his usual confidence shaken. By dawn, the base was quiet, the air heavy with smoke and cordite. 14 enemy bodies were recovered, their weapons scattered. Lena sat outside the med tent, cleaning her knife with slow, deliberate strokes. Her t-shirt was still stained, her boots still worn, but nobody looked at her the same. Soldiers passed, their eyes averted. Dawkins approached, his boots crunching gravel. He stopped, opened his mouth, then turned away wordlessly. Nobody said thank you. Nobody asked who she was. But they knew she'd saved them. A young medic barely out of training hesitated nearby, clutching a water bottle. "You were out there, weren't you?" she whispered. Lena's hands paused on the knife, but she didn't look up, just nodded once, and the medic walked away, her eyes wide with something like awe. Just after sunrise, a logistics officer named Burke, who had always dismissed Lena as a nobody, was seen arguing with a superior near the comms tent. He'd been tasked with inventorying the supply crate Lena had received, and his face was pale as he stammered through his report. "That gear, it's not ours," he said, his voice cracking. The superior waved him off, but word spread fast. The crate's contents were coded for a unit nobody could trace. Burke's name was on a reprimand list. By evening, his career teetering for mishandling classified materials. He avoided the med tent after that, his usual swagger gone, replaced by a nervous glance whenever Lena's name came up. The quiet didn't last. A low rumble broke the morning, a black helicopter touching down, kicking up dust. General McKenna stepped out his uniform, crisp, his face lined with years of command. The base snapped to attention, soldiers rigid as he walked past. "I'm only here to speak to Echo 5, he said, his voice cutting through the crowd. Lena stood, her knife sheathed, her backpack slung over one shoulder. She stepped forward, her eyes meeting his. McKenna saluted her, sharp and deliberate. "We owe you a base," he said, "and an apology." The soldiers watched frozen as the weight of his words sank in. Riley, the nervous soldier, was still clutching that crumpled paper, his hands shaking harder now, like he knew he'd seen something classified. Later that day, a supply sergeant named Wallace, who'd always treated Lena like she was invisible, was overseeing a crate count near the landing zone. He spotted her walking toward the chopper and muttered to a buddy, "She's probably just hitching a ride to get out of here." His tone was smug, but his voice wavered when Lena paused, her eyes locking onto his. "Count those crates again, Wallace," she said, her voice calm but carrying an edge. He blinked, then checked his log. 2 crates were missing from his tally. His buddy snorted and Wallace's face burned as he scrambled to correct the mistake, his clipboard shaking. Lena kept walking, her silhouette steady against the spinning chopper blades. Later, Brant was called into a closed tent. By evening, he was packing his transfer orders, signed a desk job far from the front. His hands shook as he stuffed his gear into a duffel, his face pale. Hollis, who'd mocked Lena's clothes, was caught on a hot mic, bad-mouthing McKenna's visit. The audio leaked online, and his name was trending for all the wrong reasons. By nightfall, his career in ruins. Carver, who'd screamed at Lena to stay put, lost his private contract sponsorship. His phone went silent, his buddies suddenly gone. Jenkins, the loudmouth medic, was reassigned to a remote outpost. His name left off the promotion list he'd bragged about for weeks. Nobody said Lena's name when they talked about it. They didn't need to. Lena didn't linger. She packed her medkit, the faded Echo 5 patch barely visible. She didn't say goodbye, didn't look back. As she walked to the chopper, soldiers watched their rifles slung low. Some whispered, trying to piece her together. Others stared, knowing they'd never know. Her boots crunched gravel, her posture straight, but not stiff like someone who'd carried heavier things than a backpack. The chopper's blades spun, and she climbed aboard without a word. A soldier near the landing zone dropped his cigarette, the ember hissing in the dirt as he watched her disappear into the aircraft. The base felt emptier after she left. Her silence had filled the space in a way nobody expected. A week later, a maintenance crew found a small metal tag under a cot in the med tent, engraved with a black falcon and the code E5. They turned it over to Dawkins, who just shook his head. "Leave it alone," he said, pocketing it. The soldiers who'd mocked her carried that weight now. They had judged her wrong, and reality had settled the score. Lena didn't need to gloat. Her truth was in the lives she'd saved, the shots she'd fired, the crate that knew her name. Years later, a private found a faded photo behind a crate in the med tent. It showed a younger Lena, hair shorter face, calm, standing with a unit in tactical gear. Black Falcon patches on their vests. The number Echo 5 was clear. The private showed it to Dawkins, who shook his head. "Don't ask," he said. "You won't get answers." Lena's story ended quietly, unapologetically, the way it began. She'd walked through fire not to prove them wrong, but because it was who she was. And in that walk to the chopper, she left something for everyone who'd been underestimated. You weren't wrong. You weren't alone. Your silence was enough. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.